can see what's going on. So I've been, you heard in my bio, I've been an Agile coach for a long time. I've been an Agilist for a very long time. And over the years, I have grown from being part of an Agile team myself. I was part of Agile teams for quite a long time, into into mentoring people in Agile and coaching people for the last decade or so. And in the space that I've been, I've seen certain things happening in Agile and in agility as such. So if I look at where we started, I myself started in the area of practices. I started as an XP, as an XP developer. So there's certainly we were very strongly focused on good engineering practices, etc. But we were also following the principles and the values within the Agile. When the Agile Manifesto came along, we were also following those. There are a lot of people that we see today, the how do I do that, how do I do this, that sits in the techniques and tools space of agility. But really, in my own experience, what I've noticed is that it's only really when people get to adopt an Agile mindset that things really change in organizations. It's one thing getting a few Scrum teams up and running and making sure that they're delivering, and it's a completely different thing to create organizational agility and psychological safety, decentralized decision making, all the good things that we know that Agile and agility really makes it explode in terms of high performance. Okay, so if we look at that Agile mindset, so my colleague and friend Simon Powers of Adventures with Agile has come up with the 3 beliefs that make up the Agile mindset, because everybody speaks about it and nobody really knows what it is. And he challenges everyone to see whether there's anything in Agile that we can't sort of sort under one of these 3 beliefs. And so far, it doesn't seem that we've succeeded in that. So the first belief is the complexity belief. And the complexity belief refers to the fact that most of the problems that we are struggling with in today's world is complex adaptive problems. So complex adaptive problems are ones where if we look at the problem, like Schrödinger's cat, if we look at the problem, by looking at the problem, it's already changed. And we can also never predict quite what is going to happen if we take that first step. We can only see cause and effect in a complex adaptive scenarios when we look backwards. So our whole way, in waterfall of predicting what the solution is, what the plan is, etc., then planning and executing on it, resorts under this complexity belief. We know that it's, things change too often. And things happen along the way too often for us to really be able to look in advance. Okay, so that's the first belief. The second belief, hang on, let me just, what's going on? Why does it not want to forward? There we go. The second belief is the people belief. So the people belief is what I think about individuals and interactions, in the Agile Manifesto. So the people belief is around individuals being both independent from and dependent on their teams and organizations. So that if we look at the manifesto, that individuals and interactions, so in general, human beings are interdependent, and we know this. If we never knew it, then we know it now that we're in COVID. So the people belief further states that self-organization will happen if we create the right conditions for it. And the right conditions, the basic right condition, is to treat everyone with unconditional positive regard. Okay, so that's the second belief. The third belief is the proactive belief, and that is simply the relentless pursuit of improvement, the continuous improvement part. Okay, so why did I choose to bring this forward? Or potentially because mindset is a property of an individual. Sorry, I've gone backwards and not forwards. Mindset is the property of an individual. And in the years that I've been working in coaching, I've come to realize that ultimately agile transitions or transformations stand or fall by the mindset of the leaders. Okay, so let's dive a little deeper into, if we say leaders, individual leaders, let's dive a little deeper into individual development. Okay, so I learned about adult development theory from Robert Keegan, and he is, I'm sure you would have read some of the books that he's written. Probably one of the most well-known ones in the Agile community is An Everyone Culture. Okay. So before Keegan started looking at adult development theory, people really thought that what we are kids, and once we grow out of our kiddie years, we become, I'm sorry, I'm just turning off my phone because I forgot to do that. So once we become teenagers really, and grow into adults, that's the end of our development. Okay. And Keegan, through grounded research, found out that it actually isn't the case. So if we look in the adult population, we have the following levels of development. Okay, so first of all, there's the self-sovereign mind. And if you know a teenager, or if you have a teenager, you will recognize this. Okay, generally, we outgrow this in our early 20s, but we certainly don't always completely lose it. So up until when we're teenagers, we have a feeling of connection with other human beings. And then there's like a wall comes down, and we lose the feeling of connection with those around us. So I've got my niece has just turned 15, and she has been the most lovely child all her life. And all of a sudden, literally overnight, it's like somebody switched, flipped a switch in her. And whereas she was, where she was so lovely before, I'm now more often than not referring to her as devil spawn. Okay, because this lovely child has chopped off her hair, she wears combat boots, and she's just nobody is right, and nobody understands her. And this is very typical of the self-sovereign mind. So if you look at the characteristics of the self-sovereign mind, it's that nobody understands me. I have to look out for myself. Things are either black or white, it's right or wrong, and you're either with me or you're against me. So it's really this is the state of the mind when we are in that black and white space. So as we grow out of that space, so eventually we do grow out of it. It doesn't last forever. But we then realize that we're each too small to hold onto the things that we need to hold on to. So our minds start opening up, and then we tend to get embedded in a community, a set of friends, profession, set of theories. So this is something you can hear, that this is what starts happening to us in our early 20s. So, and also what happens to us at this point is then we kind of become enmeshed in the communities that we embed in, and we kind of begin to breathe that in, and we they become who we are, and they become the lens that we see through instead of the lens we look at. Okay, so this is our second stage of development, of adult development. It's called the socialized mind, and this is really when we become well-functioning members of society. Okay, so we are concerned about what others think about us. We know that there are rules and regulations of whatever our group, our friend group, family group, religious group, society. We tend to follow those even when people are not looking. Okay. This is also when we become aware of what others think of us, and we try and change our behavior to make sure that that we reflect well in their eyes. So there's a very strong external locus of control here, and leaders can get very frustrated if they themselves have moved past this stage. They can get very frustrated with people who are in this stage because they keep on asking for directions. Where am I? Where are we going? What should I be doing? Am I doing it right? Constantly being measured against that out that, that locus of control that is outside of them. So we grow out of this once we realize that actually no theory or group or organization is infallible. And this is when we move into our next phase. Oh, sorry, let me just let you have a look at those. There's also a strong attachment to my role here, by the way. So when we move out of this, when we realize, well, there's actually more to the world than just what we've experienced so far. And this is when we move into the self-authoring mind. So generally we grow tired of trying to be what society, our peers, or our family wants us to be. And we kind of, we get tired of being like this for this one and like that for that one. I always think about the movie Zelig, Woody Allen movie, in which he is the human chameleon. So this is when we start realizing this is just too tiring. How about I start to author myself, and how I need to start dancing to the beat of my own inner drum. So this is very much the space of the traditional leader. Okay, this is not the end though. So we really strongly become aware of our own values and principles, of if we have to choose between what's right in my eyes versus what's right in somebody else's eyes, I stick to what's right in my eyes. And I won't be measured against somebody else's, somebody else's measures anymore. What I think is the best place for me to go, the path for me, the best measure of my ability, that's where I'm going to go. Okay. So the growth out of here, because this is still not, even though there's a lot of leaders, this certainly it rings our bell for leadership. There's a lot of leaders sitting at self-authoring mind. This is not the last place we go, So at a certain point in time, we also realize, practices of leadership, my personal theories, they are limited. They're limits to what they can go to. So a big thing here is what's going on in our minds is, what am I thinking and how could I be wrong? Which ultimately leads us into the self-transforming mind. So in the self-transforming mind, I not only live by my own beliefs and my own rules, but I also have the awareness that they are just rules and beliefs. I can lift them up, I can look at them and decide, do they work for me or don't they work for me? Are they still the right thing for me? Given what I've learned, given what I know, given the specific circumstances, are these the right things, or do I need to transform even my beliefs? So this is the place of everybody is right, but only partially. And actually, who knows what's right and what is wrong? So it's the place where we are no longer scared of our shadow, because we know that there's wisdom in our shadow. So we are happy to explore our shadow, and we, get into comfortable relationship with it. Okay. And we start judging things as right or wrong, efficient or not efficient. And we really embrace the richness of life. Okay. Now, this is the last stage of adult development that we currently know of. Okay. And you can certainly ask, so what? So what we keep on developing? Well, leadership development models most of the leadership development models I know has as its basis the adult development theory of Keegan. Okay, um, so and in those, in those frameworks, there's a lot of data as well. So if we look at how this looks in the general population, okay, so 13% of the adult population is sitting at before socialized mind. So in other words, in self-sovereign mind. The vast majority of the adult population is sitting at socialized mind. So external locus of control, I act in accordance with the rules and beliefs of my peer group, religion, country, laws, etc. Okay. Self-authored mind is about 34% of the population. So very often this is where we start finding the leaders, and only 7% of the population sits at self-transforming or higher. So remember, this is grounded theory research. So they didn't come with a theory and try to prove it. They gathered data and they allowed the theory to emerge from this. So still, so what? Well, here's another thing to look at. Because there is a lot of data, and I'll show you two examples. This comes from Keegan and Lisa Leahy themselves. We look at the relationship between leadership effectiveness and business effectiveness. If we are below socialized mind, okay, we tend to be ineffective. In socialized mind, we kind of not ineffective, but it's kind of, we don't really have that much of an impact. When we get into the mid zone between socialized and self-authored, that's when we start getting into, into effective leadership. Okay, and know that we spend quite a bit of our lives, in between those stages, because one aspect of us can progress to the next stage while some aspects of us are still developing. Okay, self-authored, we are effective. We really only become highly effective when we go beyond self-authored. So right now, there's 7% of the population that sits in this highly effective. Okay, I'll show you another example. So this comes from the leadership circle. You can think about socialized at the bottom, okay, and self-authoring or higher at the top. So this is data. It's probably about, I think they say it's about 7,000 data points. This is what the profile looks like of the top 10 performing organizations in their database, or the top 100 performing organizations in their database. So strongly self-authoring and higher. And at the same time, this is what the leaders of the bottom performing organizations look like. So strong socialized mind and lower. Okay. So there's a very, very strong correlation between the development, the leadership development of a leader and the effectiveness of the organization. It's proven in the data. It's not just, well, it's great to be a great person. There's more to it than that. I want to add something else to it now. So for some of you may be familiar with the model that I'm going to share with you now. Before I do that, I just want to go to the chat quickly before I add something else. I want to just go to the chat and just see whether there's any questions in the chat that I should answer at this point in time. Okay, let me see. How would you describe these different stages, changes are triggered? Externally or inner conflicts or something else. So generally what happens to us, so some of it happens as a result of being just human. So especially moving from the self-sovereign mind into the socialized mind, you get feedback from society. that you can't be a grumpy teenager forever, and that kind of helps. But most of the changes beyond that happens when something dramatic happens to us. Okay, so it can be that we lose our job, or or a close relationship that we had stops working out, or that our company, we don't get the promotion that we were aiming for and had been working for years. So there's something outside in the circumstances that gives you like a shout out that you need to change. Okay, something needs to change here. So generally we only grow, we're resistant to change as human beings. So we only grow when we kind of get kicked out of our comfort zone by some kind of external thing. Or, sometimes it happens for people when they get really sick, or they have a traumatic car accident. So, but generally it requires something impactful to kind of shake us awake, that there is a different way of being than how we currently are. So thanks, Andreas. Okay, so let's add culture to the mix. So I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with, oh, sorry, that's not what I wanted to do. No, that's also not what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do. So if we look at Frederick Laloux wrote a book about 6 or 7 years ago called Reinventing Organizations. And there's quite a, the idea has some fierce critics. In the Agile community, it became quite well known in the Agile community. So I want to talk to you just a little bit about how he has defined his culture model. Really, at the basic tenet of what he says is that as we as human beings grow and evolve, so does the organizational structures, or in generally the structures that hold us. So there's some structures below this as well, but they're not that interesting to us, from an organizational point of view. So if we look at an amber culture, an amber culture is all about stability, predictability. So there's a lot of order in there. It's quite role driven. It really focuses quite a lot on rules and regulations, and knowing what everybody should be aware of what their role is, what the responsibilities are that go along with it, what what rank looks like, etc. So we often find amber structures in places like the army, in the military, or in churches, sometimes also in schools, where there's a very clear hierarchical structure and there are very strong rules and responsibilities associated with a specific position. No organization has only one center of gravity, so we also see amber in normal organizations that are commercial and work on meritocracy, in places like the legal department, for instance. Okay, so that's kind of the lowest level that's interesting to us in organizations. The next level up is what most of us tend to work in, and those are orange organizations that really focus on achievement. Achiever orange is what we tend to call it. So whereas in amber you are born kind of into a specific position in an amber society, and that's where you die. In orange, really, it's about getting ahead, and getting ahead through through advancing yourself, coming up with the brightest ideas, working hard, etc. Okay, so here what is really valued is things like profit, things like getting ahead, things like winning. That's really sits in the orange space, and like I say, most commercial organizations live there. In the green organization, green very often comes about when people get tired of the relentless competition that sits in orange organizations, and they believe that there's a better way to be with one another. So here it is about, relationship, harmony. Green systems really value harmony, fairness. It's values driven. It's a caring kind of organization. So really humane organizations, and we find that most NGOs or NPOs, non-profit organizations, sit here. And there tends to be, pockets of green in normal organizations as well. So you might recognize that some of your agile teams sit squarely into the green, sits squarely in the green meme, or green altitude, like we say. Now, the first tier 1 memes, they all are quite derogatory about the levels below them. So orange in an orange organization, people would be quite judgmental about, all those guys, it has to work by the rules, etc. In the green organization, people tend to complain about the fact that those money grabbing corporate capitalists, it's only really when we get to teal that we start getting an understanding that actually we need all of the altitudes below. Okay, so teal is the first one that embraces everything below and just realizes that when I get to this level, I can become skillful in what is appropriate when. So if it's really requiring relationship, then let me enhance the green meme a little bit. Whereas if we really have to stick to, for legal reasons, to certain things, well, then amber is fine. Okay. Teal is also the first place where it really asks us to bring the whole human being to work. Okay. So teal very much, I'm sure that you can see if we start doing a mapping, which we'll do in a moment, that there are echoes here of the adult development. And what happens very often is that purpose-driven leaders are the only ones that are able to create teal organizations. Okay. Because, leaders determine culture. If we think about, what's possible at the different levels of development, socialized mind cannot really create anything other than an amber organization. Okay, so there sits your command and control. Okay, self-authoring mind can create orange. It can also create green. Okay, and green is kind of where we start moving into, if you've got a leader who's got a self-transforming mind, that is the place where it's finally a teal culture starts becoming possible. Okay, so our leaders generally determine what is possible from a culture point of view through their through their way of being. So if we just look at, I want to take you into a specific leadership framework so that we can just tie the whole lot together. If we look at how we make sense or meaning, and our sense-making process is actually really what's responsible for our responses or our actions. So as a leader, the way I make sense, and especially the action logic that I am bathed in when I make sense. So action logic, where does the logic for my action comes from? And I'll talk in a second about action logics, okay? That really determines, what am I seeing? What am I making up about what I'm seeing? And how do I want to respond to it? Okay. So I'm diving into the socialized mind, self-authoring and self-transforming mind in a from a slightly different angle now, to talk about where that action logic comes from and how it is tied to adult development. Okay, so What I'm sharing with you is the leadership development framework. Okay, and I'm not sharing all the levels with you, really just the ones that are interesting for us in organizations. So if we look at the opportunist, it's me versus the world, and the world's black and white. Okay, that sounds pretty much like our self-sovereign mind. In the diplomat, it's us against the world. And I've got that external locus of control, pretty much like the socialized mind. And in fact, that continues into expert. So our expert develops from when we're about six years old till we in our early 20s. And here, this is where we start looking at the world through the eyes of science and deep craft and deep skill. Okay, so this is where we start thinking about the world as complicated. So we can go deep in our expert view, but we can't go wide. And we associate with others that are as skillful and as expert in what we do than we are. Okay. If we look at achiever, which is the next layer down, here we start to have an appreciation for the world as complex. And what we do here is we finally let others in to help us. We start relying on others, and we really truly value their contributions as well, but it's still to achieve our own goals. An individualist, which is kind of a bridge between achiever and strategist. In individualist, we really truly understand that reality is an interpretation, and I look, what I see depends on me. There is no such thing as a true reality. And the individualist really truly values difference and diversity. So where we sit with, actually, let me go a little bit further before I get back to that. In strategist level, so the strategist doesn't only include everything up to that point, okay, but they are also able to listen to the beat of their own inner drum and go for it, okay, and they truly have faith in others that if they do that, they won't be hurt or lost, or they'll find their own way. So if we map this to the adult development frameworks, we find that we get into socialized mind during the course of opportunist. It's kind of mid-opportunist. And we start getting into self-authoring mind from kind of halfway through our expert. And that actually runs till our early individualists. And it's only when we get to late individualist or strategist when we get into the mindset of self-transforming. Now, let me give you some stats about those. Okay, so the group that I work with, where we use action logic, okay, the stats come from them. They're Harthill Consulting in the UK. Okay. If we look at expert is a vast majority. We didn't look at the other ones before that, but achiever, between expert and achiever, about 70 to 80% of managers tested fall into the expert and achiever. Okay. And then a further 25% fall into individualist, and all of 5% fall into the strategist and higher, strategist and deeper. The interesting thing is command and control is something that we cannot do. If I take you back to the previous slide, command and control is what we do when we are sitting in socialized. Here we can do predict and plan. It's only when we get into self-transforming that we can do sense and respond leadership. Okay. So let me get back to that one. So here's the ugly truth then. So when we are expert, that if that's our highest level of action logic, in terms of the agile mindset, we will struggle with everything except the proactivity belief. Okay. When we get into achiever, we will struggle with the complexity belief and the people belief. Okay, so we'll get used to halfway through our achiever, we'll start getting used to the complexity belief, and we'll start, kind of tasting the people belief as well. But it's really only in late individualists where all three beliefs of the agile mindset become accessible. Okay, so if we go back to the previous slide, okay, hang on, where's my, sorry, not the previous, it's on the same slide. So if we look at our agile efforts then, okay, this is why we struggle. We sit with all these leaders. I mean, achiever is really highly rewarded, especially in orange culture, okay? We sit with all of these leaders, and it's not that they are not willing to go, and grow their own individuality. It's that they can't. The complexity of mind that's required to grow fully into the agile mindset is simply not present. Okay. So now what? Okay. So before I do that, let me answer any questions that you've got about the previous section. Just see. Okay. I understand that management is heavily influencing the culture of any organization. As an agenda shift partner, I believe in the power of good conversations between all parties involved in the organization. How successful are grassroots culture initiatives from your experience? They go against management idea, command and control mainly, but with support of customers. So there's always a debate about culture. Okay, so a lot of people believe that you are not able to change culture at all. Okay, so you don't change culture, you replace culture. So basically what you do is you get rid of managers and you replace them with people that are different. So in my own experience, the most effective way to deal, especially in amber organizations where, if I think about banks tend to have a large center of gravity in amber because of legislation and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so the most effective ways I've seen of changing culture in banks have been to create a completely different business unit or a completely different part of the organization that start up with a more, I want to say, more modern culture, or a more agile friendly culture. But in general, in these large monolithic companies, it's possible when you get new leadership in smaller companies still, or somebody really evolves in their own leadership in small companies to change culture. But in the large monolithic companies, the only way that I've seen that they start paying attention to it is A, if they lose business, or B, if they cannot attract talent. That's the only way when they start looking, and even then it's quite hard. Okay. Right. Let me see what else. Okay, Shashi. How to coach if the agile mindset is not present. Any experience dealing with leaders who weren't? So we'll go into that in a moment. That's not my now what. And then from TPS, my observation in industry in general is that the process improvement is still sought after far more than agility. Efficiency yields short-term profits. Do you ever see the mindset changing? So yes, but not fast. In my own experience, what I've noticed is that they are as as more and more, a bigger and bigger part of the organization becomes people who think differently and who require a different culture, there's very often pressure on the older, on the older. There's a specific word we have in my language, call it, but on the older people in the organization to start thinking differently. In a lot of cases, they can't. The higher up you are in the organization, the more difficult it is for you to change the way that you've been thinking about forever. So I often lament, where's the good leadership? What I do think is I've been an agilist for over 20 years, and I'm not the only one. There's a whole generation of us that can actually step in and lead and become leaders ourselves. So there certainly is a tendency for wise people who are keen on still developing themselves to embrace some of the things that we bring in Agile. There are not a lot of leaders like that. And now you know why. Now that you've seen the stats, you know why. I mean, leadership development is personal development, and personal development is hard. Okay. So there needs to be a real compelling reason for people to actually examine themselves and live kind of an examined life. So okay, so there's a quick question from Fred. Is there a test we could perform to gauge where each member of our team sits on the previous scales? Yes. So there's the assessment to do action logics, the same as the assessment. Those are leadership assessments. So so you certainly can you can have your team tested. Okay, you can have your leadership tested as well. But let's move into let's move into the now what. Okay, we've got this kind of rather depressing picture about why it's so hard for organizations to embrace true agility. So what can we do? And the first thing I believe is that we need to meet them where they are. So you cannot change. I'm sure most of you know this. You cannot change somebody. Cannot change somebody else. You can invite them. You can you can give them new information about a change. You can inspire them with a vision, but you cannot change people. Okay, so what is useful for us? I mean, remembering that all models are wrong and some are useful. What is useful for us as agilists generally is to to educate ourselves, start developing a feeling, and know how to reveal a system to itself to see whether we are right or whether we are completely off the mark in terms of where they are at. Having these models give us some flexibility in terms of what are the possibilities, what are the choices that we have when we work with people. So whenever we think about culture models, for instance, or about even the adult development models, our aim should never be to do the vertical stuff. We always want to make whatever is there as healthy at its current state as it is, because all of these changes, if I think about the question earlier on, all of these changes happen kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Organically. There's you're never going to get your organization to move to a different way of being by wanting them to be there. Something needs to happen. Something needs to necessitate the change for them. So generally, when we work with people, if we make them as healthy as they are at their current level through supporting them in the way that they currently look at the world, their current meaning making, etc. Okay, then at some point the desire will come from within. We always change when our current meaning making cannot solve a problem that is brought to us. When the lens at which we look through is just old or too limiting to look at the entire problem and what sits behind it. That's when we really change. When you cannot make the problem cannot solve the problem with the tools that you currently have and the way of thinking that you currently have, but also it makes us, if we work with organizations, knowing where they are, using all of these tools, may make us work differently with them. So an example, for instance, that I have, where I was in a commercial organization. We were doing a coaching engagement in a commercial organization, and because they were a commercial organization, I assumed, without really verifying too much, that they were quite orange. So the way that I approached them was the way I would approach an orange organization. And it was only a little bit into the engagement that I realized, well, these people have quite a large center of gravity in amber. And if I had known that from the beginning, I probably would have suggested that we do more training, for instance, instead of facilitating. Because in amber organizations, there is a right way. People believe there's a right way to do things. It's a best practices kind of thing. Now, I know all of us cringe when people ask us about best practices in Agile, but if I'd known that, I could have created a little stepping stone for them by giving them more training in the beginning and giving them more ideas about, what works out there in the world, before I expected them to, and through facilitation, to come up with their own way of doing things. Okay, so it's really useful to us to know where people are, so like there's certain things that if somebody is sitting at, at socialized mind, that we just cannot expect of them. So if we don't expect of them to be acting like a self-authoring mind, and meet them where they are, then the possibility becomes, then it becomes possible for them to, over time, emerge into a different level of development. Okay. The second thing is that you need to develop your leaders. Okay. So I see a lot of Agile coaches and Scrum Masters quite happy to coach downwards. So how do I get my team to do this? How do I work with this? How do I work with that? But I don't see as many people being willing to coach upwards, and coaches are leaders too. So as a coach, you need to, how can you expect your organization, or the organization that you work with, how can you expect them to be showing up in a different way, all autonomous and self-organizing, when you yourself are not stepping into that space fully? And part of that, if Shashi, I think to your question, for instance, part of it is, if you hear that, if a question comes from your leadership team that's completely, in opposition to the Agile mindset, that's an opportunity for coaching. That's an opportunity for educating. It's an opportunity to have a conversation, and it's the first step in realigning them. So educate them, coach them, challenge them. Make sure that you learn about leadership yourself. If you need to, if you're unsure or uncertain about, speaking truth to power, find a coach and work with a coach so that you become comfortable in coaching senior leaders, executive leaders, whoever, whatever kinds of leaders you're working with. But you need to figure out what is standing in your way, in your own leadership, which is the next point, actually. Okay, what is standing in your way to develop your own leadership? Okay, so there's Agilists tend to have an aversion to power being used in the traditional way, and rightly so. But sometimes that's grown into an aversion to use power in any way whatsoever. So if we can't show a new way of using power, if we can't become the leaders that we've been waiting for, what, how can we expect the leaders that we are working with to show up in that way? You don't have to lead with authority. You don't have to have positional power. You can lead without authority. So whether you have to go on your own professional leadership development journey, or get a coach, or just learn about leadership, or anything, so you educate yourself, work on yourself, figure out where are your blind spots, even if you just go on a professional coaching course. Professional coaching is renowned for forcing development in people. You realize what the lenses are that you look through, and where your blind spots are. So, and there are like multiple assessments. So these, speak to me about them. So there are multiple assessments that can tell you where you are as a leader, 360s, etc. There's at least 3 that I can help you with. So it's out there for us people. It's out there for us to find out, where do we sit and what do we need to do? Because if we are going to wait for leaders to change, some of them will die before they will change, so, okay. And then a very important last point for me is that as Agilists, we need to be deliberately developmental. So, this Robert Keegan coined this phrase the book is called "An Everyone Culture." And the basic idea is that we ultimately want to create a deliberately developmental organization. So it's kind of a learning organization on steroids. And that happens through creating deliberately developmental relationships, where people come together with the explicit aim of developing themselves and their mental complexity, and therefore their adult development and their meaning making. So, if you look at sense making, I showed you a brief diagram of just how we do sense making, how our sense making works. So there are certain practices around sense making, collective sense making, and there are also, you can create deliberately developmental environments and practices for development, so find those relationships. I've been in deliberately developmental relationships for probably about 4 years now, and they have been where a lot of my learning has taken place, and they are free because you just hook up with some other people who want to do the same thing. They are free, they are deep, they are challenging, and they really challenge you to look at not only how you think and why you think, but also what is the lens that you're looking at, when you do your thinking and when you do your problem solving. So I'll take some more questions now. Okay, but really the message today is hopefully that it creates some empathy in you for those that we work with, some empathy in you for yourself, and some guidelines about what to do with all of this. So I'm going to stop my share so that I can see you. And then I'll answer some more questions. Okay, so let's see. Okay. Yeah, so Heartdeal. So I'm actually, part of my own leadership journey has been to also involve myself quite deeply in adult development, and I'm still doing that. So the leadership circle, you can get an assessment done for that if you mail me or you send me send me a note. I can give you the details where you can go and who you can speak to. I myself do 2 of them as well, and there's also the agility, Bill Joyner stuff. Agile leadership is another one of those. So okay, let me see what else is there. You're mostly looking in the software industry, or do you see agility branching out to other industry space? I haven't worked in the software industry for about 5 years. So no, I'm not mostly looking in the software industry. It's been I've worked in big pharma, learning and development, management consulting. So yeah, so I haven't done any work in the software industry. So it has branched out quite a lot. And if you are interested, do yourself a favor, and I'll put it in the chat. Have a look at the Business Agility Institute. Yeah, if you just Google that, I can't remember off by heart what their website's called, but the Business Agility Institute, you will find loads and loads and loads of information there. Okay. And Leslie, I've been on my journey in this arena since the fall of 2018. I can 100% say I'm a different person than I was then. It's hard, but so worth it. Yes, it requires great effort for things to become effortless. So, any other questions? For once, I don't have to rush because I thought it was only a 45-minute presentation. So it's a nice change.
As opposed to using the chat, can we just come on and ask questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, of course. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm Leslie Morse. Thank you so much for this. It was very validating to hear someone else explain sort of how I've built my own mental models and the way I'm linking stuff together. So that was really great, Antoinette. There's so much in the way as Agilists we sort of show up in the trainer stance. Mm-hmm. And to me, it is all about like learn technique, 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 mm-hmm. technique. And really what we've got to do is kind of pivot that axis so that we can start doing stuff with all of this knowledge that we've acquired all the time. And I noticed how you said that we shouldn't be going into organizations with an agenda of helping them on their own vertical development. Yet, from a knowledge perspective, we know that's what's necessary so that all these skills can come online and be used.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit more about navigating that dance. Because I see myself with an agenda of vertical development.
Yeah. So to me, that agenda of vertical development is a wish. It's, of course, my soul wants that. My soul wants, my purpose is to develop people. So my soul wants that. But to want it for somebody when they are not ready for it or they don't want it yet is a kind of a violence to me, So the only thing, I always think about our stance as an invitation, keep on inviting. And let me give you a little bit more. As a coach, as a professional coach as well, one thing that I do believe is I will hold up the light for you even when you can't see it yourself. Okay, but I will just hold it up. If you choose to follow it and bring it into your, your life, then great. If you're not ready for that yet, then that's also great. So I certainly work with, if we think being an agile coach, I certainly work no longer with teams at the team level because there's a much bigger, here's a way of working for people. It's become quite controversial as well, but certainly all the years that I worked at team level, I brought much more of an agenda. So, you will be using a prioritized product backlog. You will be doing these events. You will be blah, 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 blah. But as we move into the organization, into the sphere of where change is different, so there's so much more of a hands change at the bottom, and there's so much more of a heart change at the top. I've grown less and less attached to the agenda, to the point where I now believe that growing agile in an organization is pointless. Okay, what the hell, if if agile or agility doesn't give you happier people, better business results, faster time to market, all of those things, then what on earth are we doing? So I don't even have that agenda anymore. The agenda that I generally have, and I've had for the last 4 or 5 years, learned through really hard knocks, is what's the business problem that you think Agile will solve? And let's work on it together and see whether actually Agile will solve it or whether it's actually, something completely different, So I always used to say that bringing an Agile into an organization is not going to force people that are not talking to one another at the moment to start talking to one another, So if communication is the problem, let's work on communication, and then we take it from there. So I don't know whether that answers your question, Leslie, because I can go off on a tangent.
No, we could absolutely geek out on this for a long time. Yeah. That was good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Okay, TPS. The complexity I see is still agility is great for long-term success and is vital for survival, but it's not about making the most money now. That's the pushback. Yes, I agree with that. And I also think that people never know what they ask for when they ask for Agile. Peter Block has a saying, the customer never really knows what the real problem is. So the person that asks you to come in and do an engagement, they tend to 9 times out of 10 be part of the problem. It's not once they truly start understanding that it's not only the workers that have to change, or that it's the way of working that has to change, or that we can roll out Agile. But actually, if I want to get the results that Agile promises, then I need to make some changes in the way I run my company, in the way I make decisions, in the way I reward people. Then it becomes, well, actually, it means that I have to change. What do you mean I have to change? I brought you in to come and make my people change, So generally that's another problem as well, and that's the pushback. The pushback that I most of the time find inside organizations is when people haven't realized that they have to show up in a completely different way or in a substantially different way. So it definitely is. The lean guys who've been bringing in lean into organizations for a long time, they told people from the get-go, you will take 2 years before you see true results. And I don't think, was it Ken or was it who wrote twice the results in half the time or something? If I could hit him over the head with that book, I would, So that didn't do us any favors in these really exaggerated claims that actually will only come about. I mean, there's some low-hanging fruit, but it will only come about once we've truly become more agile and have grown our inner agility. So.